Oye, mi gente, you know who this is. As we're coming to 2013, I just want to start out with a little bit of clarity. I know that some of you may have questions like, why do I always use men of color, and why do I usually show them as regular looking, quote unquote, as other people? Well, I do that for multiple reasons, but primarily for two. Number one, the face of mental illness is changing. I'm at the current point in an urban area, and I can't tell you how many black men and other men of color that I see on a regular basis. I mean, getting on the bus, the train, the subway, whatever, that I walk outside of my door and I see someone, and of course by me living with schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, I'm able to recognize it when I see it, that are affected in this way. And so many times it's people that live next door to us, or work with us, or go to school with us, and so I show these images because it's real, true to life. Another thing that I really want to point out here about schizophrenia, that it's a thought disorder, and that's what's hard for a lot of people to wrap their mind around. When you see somebody that looks, quote unquote, like you, that dresses well, that is able to hold a conversation, that is going to work or whatever, it's kind of hard for you to imagine that this person could have psychological deficits and they're having problems and issues because they don't appear that way. But so many times that's not the case, And another thing that happens with schizophrenia, it affects the way, like I said, that you think, and a lot of times it impairs our judgment where we cannot properly take good care of ourselves. For example, you may have a person with schizophrenia who is impaired, and because they're impaired, they're not able to make proper judgments on people and friends and distinctions on, maybe there's some people that you might recognize as shady, and maybe when they're thinking clearly they would too, but they could have patches and periods of times, or whether we can, because I'm one of those people, that we may not be able to really, make a good judgment call on this person, or these people are not the type of people, that we need to be hanging around. If they're shady, and getting around these people can cause us to have a lot of problems, and not knowing, how to do things that other people take for granted. And it's not necessarily even not knowing, but it's not making good judgment calls, like, for example, on how to properly, manage your funds so that you can make sure all your bills are paid, that your rent is done, and the essentials and things like that, or understanding that you need to save ahead and make sure you have, money for your winter coat because the winter's coming, and it's just so many different ways that it can affect your thinking because it is a thought disorder. It's very pervasive, It can make you very paranoid, and a lot of times it's really hurtful when it happens that you begin to become paranoid of people that friends and family, and so it can be, that people that you loved and you really like being around, you become paranoid of them, and you don't want to go around them because you become very uncomfortable with them, and it's a two-edged or a double-sided street with that, because in terms of the isolation factor with schizophrenia, because in most cases, if people know, that you have a mental disability, then a lot of times they don't want to be bothered. You know what I'm saying? And then if it has gotten you to the point where maybe you look fine, you seem to speak normal, you can go around people to a certain extent and they really can't tell, and even that right there is very stressful. You're around people and you're having all these different thoughts and different feelings and stuff like this, and all these fears and paranoias, and you're trying to, as they say, play that off. That is so stressful to live under that kind of pressure. But just say that you look perfectly normal in the way that you look, talk, or dress, or whatever. People are very discriminating in terms of the type of friends that they choose. Whether or not they knew you had schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder or whatever, if you're not working, you never have any money, you don't have a car, and you don't have the mobility to do things, most people, don't have time for that anyway. They don't want to be bothered. So this disease of schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder, it's so cool because what it does, it just creates an environment of isolation. And it's so hard to reach out of that, And after a while, what happens? You begin to lose your desire to be around people. It starts off as a fear or suspicion, and then you get like really paranoid and distrustful, and you just kind of gravitate away, and then it gets to the point after doing that so long, you begin to lose your socialization skills, because one thing about mental disabilities, mental illness, for most of us, it makes us terribly socially awkward. That's why a lot of times when you see people with schizophrenia, those that you can recognize, a lot of us, we don't really have a lot of friends. You may see one friend or one close relative or something like that. If you see that, it's like if you've seen the old Frankenstein movie, The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Not to say we're terrible people like that, so maybe that's not a good analogy. So let's strike that from the record. But it can literally make you out of a hermit, And it's so terrible because a lot of times a person with schizophrenia, we really do, somewhere within us want those relationships, want those friendships, want to be able to socialize, want to date, want to, have mates, spouses, partners, families, but can't seem to make that connection and feel so uncomfortable. Sometimes the thought of just actually going for me, to a family dinner is enough to just give me a freaking panic attack. It's just terrible what it does to us, and I hate that the media's perception, of us is that everybody with a mental disability or schizophrenia, especially schizophrenia, that's the word that, drop your packages, hide your husband, hide your wife, that kind of thing, that foolishness that the media has projected as if we're some dangerous people, when 9 out of 10, we're most likely to be the victims of violent crimes ourselves. I know several people with mental illness that have been the victims of robbery, molestation, physical abuse, verbal abuse. I've been through all of those things, and I talk about it freely in my videos. Even during the time of my sexual abuse, as a late teen, I didn't really understand what was happening to me and understand that it shouldn't be happening. And so because of that inability to make those proper judgments, I suffered some awful things for a long period of time. For some strange reason, for many of us with schizophrenia, it takes away a level of your maturity process. So it's like you could be, you could be 35 or 34, whatever, or 26 or 28, just making up random ages, alright? But it's like, for many of us, you don't emotionally and mentally mature to the level of your chronological age. And so for that reason, you are not able to make the proper connection with the world and not able to see the world as a literal place. I know for myself, it was always like some kind of dream place, something that wasn't real, that I could never really understand and get my mind around. But because I looked at so quote-unquote normal like everybody else, nobody caught this. And even though I felt something was wrong, I had no language for it. I had no way to articulate it, no way to share what was happening. My mental illness or mental disability started as a small child, and just progressively got worse. Because think about it, what happens with any other medical condition? If you don't treat it, it gets progressively, just gets worse and worse and worse. And it's just really sad, that a lot of times in communities of color, either we don't have the resources in our community, or it's a situation where is perhaps some resources are there, maybe there's a local mental health clinic or whatever, but when you're raised in an environment that says to you mental illness is not real, and that you need to just pull yourself together or man up. You know, all these different things that you hear coming up in our communities is so discouraging. So the support that you really need to get, that other people in other communities experience, most times in communities of color, we don't get any of that. So it's like a miracle almost for a black man or Latino man to be able to, you know, come to grips with them having a mental disability and to reach outside of all that stigma and to go out and get help. You know, it's just really, really a struggle. And it's just so many things that it does to you, you know. And I think about all the people that I see on a regular basis that look just so regular, again, as you would say, that are affected by mental illness. And I want to dedicate this video to this young man. I don't know his name, but over the summer, I would have to, you know, get on the train or the bus sometimes or whatever and go downtown. And I would see him standing outside of this building. I'll call it a federal building, whatever it is, right? It's on the steps. And he would be standing there in the mornings, just standing there, well dressed with sunglasses. And I would see him, and then I would go to where I had to go, be gone a few hours, come back. He would still be standing there. I'm like, wow, his break must be corresponding with the time it's time for me to go back to where I was at the time, or living, or whatever. And again, I thought that he was a security guard. I saw him not that long ago, after the weather had changed, and I saw him, and he was in a full-blown conversation with himself, and I was like, wow, now I get it, now I understand. A lot of times in schizophrenia, it can also cause you, in schizoaffective disorder as well, to have obsessive thoughts and compulsive actions about things. You can get obsessed over something as simple as a movie or a record, a book, and just become so engrossed in that'll become like a reality to you, and you begin to live that and become everything that character is. I remember so many times over the years as a kid going to movies, or even sometimes now I have to be careful of that, and feel like I actually become a character in the movie. It just can take you really out of your head. With schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder, a lot of times what it does, and it's not at all times with all people, but it can give you the inability, again at times, to not be able to tell fantasy from reality. You know, and it's hard. It makes it just so difficult. But I do want to say that it's not to be said that just because a person that has a mental disability or mental illness says something or tells you something or whatever, it doesn't mean that you can just discount them. Oh, they have a mental illness, so don't pay any attention. You know, they're crazy anyway. No. A lot of us are very intelligent. I know people, you know, that are college students and, you know, really good jobs and things like that. It affects us all in different ways, but, you know, it's just a very, very cruel and isolating disease that we're still starting to wrap our arms around and get an understanding of. But, again, I just wanted to, you know, let everybody out there know that we with schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, we're defying the odds. We're breaking the stigma. And we're standing up and we're saying we're here, and we're, you know, going to do the best that we can to enhance and better ourselves, but we need your support too, you know. So just hopefully everybody will be a little bit more open-minded and understand that people with mental illness and mental disabilities, we're people just like anybody else, and we need and deserve love too. All right, live and love, mi gente. Te quiero. Men of color. And why do I usually show them as regular looking, quote unquote, as other people? Well, I do that for multiple reasons, but primarily for two. Number one, the face of mental illness is changing. Oye, mi gente, you know who this is. As we're coming to 2013, I just want to start out with a little bit of clarity. I know that some of you may have questions like, why do I always show these images because it's real true to life. Another thing that I really want to point out here about schizophrenia, that it's a thought disorder. And that's what's hard for a lot of people to wrap their mind around. When you see somebody I'm at the current point in an urban area, and I can't tell you how many black men and other men of color that I see on a regular basis. I mean, getting on the bus, the train, the subway, whatever, that I walk outside of my door and I see someone, and of course by me living with schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, I'm able to recognize it when I see it, that are affected in this way. And so many times it's people that live next door to us, or work with us, or go to school with us, and so